This is TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast with your host, the Classic Rock Brainiac, yours truly, Terrence Reardon. Sit back and listen to me gush over albums that I love that either had an impact on my life or rock and roll in general, and be rest assured that there's no country or rap nonsense to be found here. So welcome to another exciting episode of TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast. The king has returned. The boss is back. It's the Classic Rock Brainiac, Terrence Reardon here. That's my little intro for the show. With another brand new episode of TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast. This episode, unlike the last one, is completely brand spanking new. And it's on a band that also 45 years ago released their final album with their classic lineup. And it's a band who were arguably one of the biggest, actually they were the most successful American band in rock history. This band is just number 2 to the Beatles as far as biggest selling album bands in the United States. That is the Eagles. Yeah, you see it right here, folks. I'm going to be talking about the Eagles, the Big Valboski's least favorite band. Terrence, you mean Lebowski. Lebowski, Valboski, whatever. All I can think of is that wrestler. Hello, ladies. That porn star, Val Venus. Yeah, a little joke. I think the guy's a Flaming Lips fan, to be perfectly honest with you. But that's okay. But I love the Eagles. I grew up with them. They were one of my gateways into rock and roll at a very early age. And this album here I'm going to be talking about was actually if I'm counting here, 1, 2, 3, the 4th album I ever owned in my life. So this is going to be a little special for me. And it's an album that's been in my family pretty much since it came out. And it's called The Long Run. Yeah, it's anniversary past, but I figured I'd talk about it anyway, because this album is a masterpiece. Yeah, this was the follow-up album to Hotel California. And some people say, oh, it's not as good as Hotel California. I think in some ways this album's a little better, because it doesn't suffer from radio fatigue. Because the Hotel California album, which I'll re-air at some point, with some modifications of course, was the first 3 songs on the album do get played on the radio, but the rest of the album doesn't get touched. This album, you rarely hear anything on the radio these days. I mean, maybe in the city, in one of the songs which appear in the movie, the ballad, I think you occasionally hear, but you don't hear the lion's share of this album on the radio. Although, a lot of singles came from it. So yeah, I'll be talking about The Long Run, and I'll be having help from other sources other than Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is for the devil. But, without further ado, let's dig into this album, shall we? I think we shall. The Long Run by the Eagles was released in September 1979. This was their 6th studio album, their final album of the decade that they conquered America, the 70s. And by this point, the band was on cloud 9. But there was internal issues within the band. So the Eagles, who comprised of co-founders, singer, drummer, lyricist Don Henley, and singer, guitarist, keyboard player, songwriter, the late great Glenn Frey, plus guitarist Don Felder, who joined the band in 1973. He didn't replace anybody. And guitarist, occasional singer-songwriter Joe Walsh, who joined the band in late 1975, replacing original Eagle Bernie Ledden, were riding high with the success of Hotel California. But bass player, the late great bass player Randy Meisner, was fired from the band after a bust-up he had with Glenn Frey at one of the shows on the Hotel California tour. If you watch the History of the Eagles documentary, you know what I'm talking about. And on this review, I will be talking about not just the Long Run album, but the Offshoot live album as well. So we'll be getting 2 albums in one review. But such is life. I try to be as comprehensive as possible, folks. But anyway, back to the story. So Henley, Frey, Felder, and Walsh were now like, who are we going to get? So what did they do? They got in former Poco bass player Timothy B Schmit, who's still with what's left of the Eagles now. A little controversy on that end, but c'est la vie. Anyway, the band carried on, did some more touring dates into 1977, going into 1978, and decided during 1978 to work on another album. But first, guitarist Joe Walsh recorded his solo album, but seriously, folks, in late 77, early 78. And that album featured contributions from the Eagles guys on the song Tomorrow, which featured backing vocals by Henley, Fry, and Schmit, the new boy. And also Don Felder contributed pedal steel on Secondhand Store and co-lead guitar on In the Station, a rockin' tune, which was a precursor to what would come on the long run for one of the songs. But leave it to Joe Walsh and Don Felder to come up with the rock and roll goods, like they always do. But the band started finally recording this new album in 1978, and the original plan was to have it as a double album. The band were going to try and create their own physical graffiti, their own Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, their own, this was before these two came out, Tusk and The Wall from Fleetwood Mac and Pink Floyd respectively. Of course, the biggest double albums from that bunch were Zeppelin, and of course Pink Floyd's The Wall, which I talked about in the last episode. That was a juggernaut. That's the biggest selling double album in rock and roll history. Although the RIAA has it as the White Album, but The Wall sold more copies. Back to the story. So the Eagles began recording this thing with producer Bill Zimzik and engineered once again by Bill Zimzik and his assistant Allan Blazek and Ed Mashel at Bayshore Recording Studios in Miami, Florida. But the problem was the band's drug use was getting a little too out of control. I mean, they weren't strung out on heroin, but they were puffing on that 420, which is marijuana, as Roscoe P. Coltrane would call it, or Boss Hogg would say, marijuana. I can't help it. That's how I say marijuana now and marijuana these days. It's just my wacky humor making fun of pot. I know it's nothing to laugh about, but the way you pronounce it, you gotta have a joke. Anyway, I digress. So they were on the old 420. Plus, they were doing the Peruvian Marching Foot powder, which, for those of you who don't know, is cocaine. I got that from WKRP. So yeah, you get some wacky sense of humor on the show here. So the band were doing tons and tons of drugs and trying to get this double album thing off the ground. But unfortunately, some of the tracks that they tried to make were wound up scrapped by the band. And then eventually it would surface on one of the Eagles Soul Pull records as a long-run leftovers, which eventually saw a release on the 2000 box set Eagles Selected Works, which featured a series of rock music tunes written by the members of the band, mostly in the rock and roll vernacular. And then you had some one part or two parts trying to have like a country rock sort of vibe thing, but they didn't want to repeat themselves, so that got scrapped. One of the pieces, or two of the pieces, actually wound up surfacing on Joe Walsh solo albums. One part of Rivers of the Hidden Funk, which would later emerge on the long run on Joe Walsh's There Goes the Neighborhood album in 1981, which featured Don Felder on talkbox guitar and Joe Walsh on lead vocal and lead guitar. The song was developed during the sessions for the long run, but Don Henley and Glenn Fry could not come up with any lyrics for it, so they scrapped it. Which I think upset Henley and Felder and Walsh. Like, hey, we came up with this great rockin' tune. What the hell's going on here? And then a bunch of other rockers, including the do-do-do-do, gung-gung-ga-da-da-dum, that was scrapped. I'm like, what the hell? That could have developed into a great rock tune. The da-da-dun, da-da-dun. That could have been a great rock. A lot of great rock and roll tunes could have been developed, but Henley and Fry said, no way, Jose. What the hell was wrong with them? And then you had a funk exercise, which then bleeds into Told You So, which Joe Walsh and Don Felder would complete on Joe's 1983 album, You Bought It, You Name It. The da 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 da. And Don Henley's drumming on this was phenomenal. He was actually using his, I think he was using either his Ludwig kit or he got a brand new Tama drum kit just for the studio, and used Sin drums on the track. So he goes, you know, the acoustic drums and early electronic drums going boom, 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 boom. Oh my goodness. And Glenn Frey doing the power chord rhythm while Walsh and Felder were going da 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 da. So that was actually intended for the long run, but again, Frey and Henley said no, which pissed off those guys of Felder and Walsh. Felder and Walsh were livid, to say the least. But the first song that was put to tape that was a keeper was I Can't Tell You Why, which I'll talk about that song when I get to it, but that was actually the first song recorded for the album, and was the song that they kept. As they were trying to come up with more songs for this proposed double album, it just turned into a slug. Ah, shit! Pardon my French, I forgot one more track that was recorded during the long run sessions as part of that intended double album. One called Born to Boogie. And this was the Eagles' version of doing like a ZZ Top sort of thing before ZZ Top had success. Actually, they had success back then, but this kind of had like the Lagrange sort of vibe, with Don Felder on slide guitar, Joe Walsh on rhythm guitar, Glenn Frey on Hammond organ, singing the "People I was born to boogie, boogie down." Oh my goodness. Timothy B Schmit on bass, Don Henley on the drums. I almost forgot about that. I mean, yeah, that was recorded during the long run sessions, but was not on the album, but it was included on the Selected Works box set, which I was like, oh crap, I almost forgot to mention it. Sheesh, I knew I forgot something. And one of the riffs, which was the that turned into ILBTs on Joe Walsh's You Bought It, You Name It. I forgot that on the long run leftovers. Shows you that the classic rock brainiac's brain had a brain fart. But I was like, oh, sheesh, I forgot to mention it. Or to quote Phil Collins as Harry the Robber, oh, shit, I forgot. But yeah, I figured I'd bring that into the mix. And furthermore, ILBT stands for I Like Big Tits. Yes, that song from You Body, You Name It, which has always been one of my favorite Joe Walsh tunes. So yeah, a number of these things would be resurrected by Joe Walsh and Don Felder. But for some reason, the Eagles rejected all these. And of course, one other thing that did emerge from all this, which eventually surfaced on the Selected Works box set and on Greatest Hits Volume 2, if you had the original pressings of both, the Offtune Piano Hidden Gem. Dun 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 dun. Yeah, dun 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 dun. Oh my goodness, how could you forget that? Everyone's like, oh, what about that Offtune Piano thing? Yeah, I figured I'd mention it because I was like, because when I first heard that on Greatest Hits Volume 2, I was like, where the heck is this Eagles track? It turns out it was part of the Soul Pull long run sessions from 1978-79 when they were recording the album. For those of you who don't know what Soul Pull is, it's one of those collection of records that the band did to give to their families and producer Bill Zimzik. It was just them horsing around in the recording studio while they were making their albums. Eventually it would surface as random victims on the Selected Works box set, but I was like, sheesh, I almost forgot those two items. Good thing I just remembered. So anyway, those were the other things that made it to box sets, especially Selected Works. If you had the first pressing of Selected Works box set, you get that Offtune Piano. And if you have Greatest Hits Volume 2, the original CD, and the vinyl, which is on the 180-gram repackage of Greatest Hits Volume 1 and 2, if you can find it, you get that hidden piano, off-key piano thing with the band going dun 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 dun. Oh yeah, oh my goodness, I always enjoyed that. Anyway, those were also recorded during the long run sessions, but the band left it off. I guess they didn't want their sense of humor shown back then. But they were goofballs. Sometimes cocaine made you do brackish things. But I digress. Anyway, back to the review already in progress. And another thing that they recorded during these sessions was their Christmas contribution, Please Come Home for Christmas, an old Charlie Brown, no, not the cartoon character, but the blues singer, Charles Brown. His song, which was a Christmas staple, and his lyrics were originally, Bells will be ringing the glad, glad news. Don Henley decided to change the lyric to the sad, sad news, with Don on drums and vocals, Glenn Frey on piano, Joe Walsh on rhythm guitar, and Don Felder on guitar solos, doing that brilliant guitar solo on it. And Timothy B Schmit's recorded performance debut on a record, playing bass guitar. And this song has become a Christmas staple. I knew it was recorded during the long run sessions because of the tone. And when I first heard this properly in December of 91 on a 94 WHJY double shot, they played Life in the Fast Lane, and then they played from Hotel California, and then they played this. And I'm like, the legendary Eagles Christmas track. I heard parts of the ending before, but then I finally got to hear the whole song, and it was love at first listen. And the DJ, who was Phil Marlowe at 94 HJY at the time, goes, great song from the Eagles on 94 HJY. I'm like, you're damn right it is. And arguably, it's one of my top 5 favorite, actually it's still my favorite Christmas song in the rock and roll vernacular. Remember, folks, during Christmas, I just listen to rock and roll and or comedy-related Christmas tunes. No pedophiles, no Michael Jackson. No psycho bitches from hell, no Mariah Carey, of course. Nor Ariana Taco Grande. Nor Taylor Swift. Nor bitch knee sneers, nor any of that crap. No Frank Sinatra, no nothing. And yeah, I even played the Pink Floyd Christmas tunes, which were not ever officially released. But, except for Holly and the Ivies, of course, but that's neither here nor there. But the Eagles' Please Come Home for Christmas was initially a top 20 single in late 78, early 79, when it was released as a 45, and it reached number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100. One of the rare Christmas tracks to do so. And since then, the song has appeared on the band's 2-disc retrospective, The Very Best of the Eagles, if you bought it here in the U.S. in October of 2003, which is highly recommended. It also appears on the Eagles Legacy box set, as far as the studio version goes, which sounds incredible on that box set. And the song is, no matter how many times I've heard it over the last 30 some odd of the years, still get an enjoyment hearing it. And one of the best Christmas tunes of all time. And I don't like Bon Phony's version. Pooey is what I think of Bon Phony. Anyone who likes that guy should be bitch slapped. There's a reason why Nirvana and Pearl Jam came along, and and Kurt Cobain, was, may he lay in peace, said it perfectly about Bon Phony. He was a talentless piece of you-know-what. God bless Cobain. Please Come Home for Christmas, the Eagles version, phenomenal. Best version, the only version in my equation. The Eagles for the win. And then, of course, its B-side was an original that was not used on the long run called Funky New Year, which is about the pitfalls of celebrating New Year's. With Don Henley's vocals drenched in flinch and ADT, Don Henley on vocals, clavinet played by Glenn Frey, and guitars played by Joe Walsh and Don Felder, and bass guitar by Timothy B Schmit, and Don Henley singing, went to a party just last night, wanted to bring the year in right, went to a party, don't know how last time I was a happy man, but the way I feel right now, it's going to be a funky new year. Oh my goodness, I thought it was, when I first heard this, I thought it was an outtake from the Hotel California period, but it was recorded during the long run sessions. And this rocker, which you don't hear on terrestrial radio anymore. You're like, what the hell happened here? I think the song is great. A great funky rock tune. The band playing Parliament Funkadelic, funk 2 on the, the 1, 2, right on par with Don Henley playing brilliant drums. He was a creative drummer back then. That was before he developed some stiffness in his arms from I don't know what, but he was a phenomenal drummer at times. He could play. I mean, he was no John Bonham, but he was a great drummer. Especially on the 70s Eagles tracks, he was an in-the-pocket drummer. And, just and of course he was Golden Throat. So he sang this as well, and the ending of the song is great. Nurse, I'm worse. Oh my goodness. And like Please Come Home for Christmas, the band did not play it live until the 1999-2000 New Year's Eve Millennium shows, which you can find on the Eagles Selected Works box sets, live versions of these two. But the studio version was only available on single as a 45 years until the CD single for Please Come Home for Christmas came out in the 90s. But then the song would eventually finally see release on an Eagles album proper in 2018 on that Eagles Legacy box set, which I discussed and hinted at. Which, if you don't own it, you should, because it has every Eagles album in one swoop. And now it only retails, I think, for like $100 or something. So you get all 6 albums, or all 7 studio albums, all their live albums, non-album tracks, B-sides, and live videos in one box. If you don't know where to start, get that, and I'll talk about that in the recommendations a little later. But yeah, funky New Year, great rockin' tune. Should have been on the album, but wasn't meant to be. So by 1979, with the single released, Asylum Records, Joe Smith, who was running Elektra and Asylum, as the Elektra Asylum Records thing, was like, guys, we need that new album. But the band were struggling to get a double album. So the band decided not to push themselves and just go for a single album. So it took some weight off the shoulders. So they spend much of 1979 recording, mixing, overdubbing, and coming up with the 10 songs that made the final product. And when it was released, let's just say the album was another kick in the pants to the record industry, which the music industry needed a savior. And of course, the first savior was Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor. The other savior was, spoiler, this album. I'll tell you how well it did at the end of the review. But my introduction to this album came, I think, around the time the album was released. Because I recall, I think my mom or my sister Tony, may they both lay in peace, had this on vinyl. And, I grew up listening to the band, and then one time my mom bought me the album on vinyl, and I loved it. This was actually, I think, it was the 4th album I ever owned. It was the 3rd on vinyl, it was the 4th I owned in any format, be it LP, 8-track, or cassette. It was vinyl first. Then I eventually got it for Christmas on cassette in December of 81, along with my Sesame Street cassette player, the Eagles' Greatest Hits Volume 1, Hotel California, and both by the Eagles, and Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band's Night Tonight, which turned out to be the 5th album I ever owned. So yeah, I was a rock and roller from the time I was a small little kid, very small child. Being the youngest of 8, you were exposed to a lot of music. Luckily in my case, because of my mother and my sister, may they both lay in peace, it was mostly rock and roll. But yeah, the long run, over the years I've had on just about every format. I've had on LP, I've had on cassette, I've had on 8-track, and CD. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. So yeah, it's been released on every format you could possibly imagine. And yeah, I've had every format. Then I got the cassette again in 83, then I lost that, then I got it again in 86, which I was happy to keep for a while, then I lost it again. Then in March 91, when I got back into the band after taking a little break, because I was developing my rock sponge, rock brainiac reputation, went back to the long run, I was like, this is still a great record after all these years. Sometimes you take a break and then you go back to it, you're like, phenomenal. And that's what happened. Ever since 1991, I've always had Eagles albums in my collection properly. Although I had it when I was a child, when I was 15, I re-embraced it and reacquired the catalog in between collecting Megadeth and Queensryche. Yeah, so I had just finished Megadeth, was about to get into the Queensryche catalog when I got all the Eagles albums, all in one swoop between March and April of 91. So I got it in this order. The Long Run, then Hotel California, then Eagles Live, Greatest Hits Volume 1, self-titled, Desperado, Greatest Hits Volume 2, One of These Nights, and On the Border, reacquiring, that is. Except the first album I never owned until I was 15, but that's neither here nor there. But this album, some people may complain it's too hard rock, too heavy, the Eagles should not be doing hard rock. Well, boo-hoo-hoo. The band knew music was changing. And some people call it their black album because it had a black album cover, which has just, it's, you know, if you have the record, you know what I'm talking about. It's a black cover with just the words Eagles, the long run in white lettering, and then the back cover's black and gray and white. And at first you're like, are they still going to look like the bunch of porn stars that they did in the 70s on this album sleeve? Turns out that wasn't the case, because when you open up the gatefold, you notice that Don Felder still looked the same as he did on the Hotel California sleeve, with the mustache and beard. Joe Walsh had the porn star mustache, which was fully grown by then. On the Hotel California sleeve, he was clean shaven, but now in the long run, he had the full mustache. Timothy B Schmit had the clean shaven baby face look. And then, of course, the two founding Eagles somewhat changed their appearance. Don Henley still had the afro and the album gatefold, but that mustache beard that he had on the previous two albums, that was gone for the clean-shaven babyface look, which he would pretty much adopt for the rest of his career and the rest of his life. Although he would experiment with that goatee in the 2010s. But yeah. So Don Henley adopted the clean-shaven look, which he pretty much stuck with for the rest of his career. And then Glenn Frey, his appearance, you could tell he was ready for the new decade. The long hair and the porno stash were gone, welcoming in short hair and clean-shaven look. So Glenn Frey was ready for the new decade. And inside the vinyl sleeve was a photo of producer Bill Zimzik, who was the unofficial sixth member of the band. And what was the material like? Well, I'll tell you my opinion on this right this instant. So we begin proceedings with Trying to Live My Life Without You. Just kidding, just kidding. But yeah, this song does nick from that. It's the title track to The Long Run, which begins with Don Henley's drum beat going bump, 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 and the slide guitar playing of Joe Walsh and Don Felder. Although Don Felder didn't get credit, but Joe Walsh is on lead slide. But harmony slide was played by Joe Walsh and Don Felder, with Glenn Frey playing a rhythm guitar track, which sounded like a porno track. And of course, Glenn Frey was using his cream-colored Fender Telecaster for the rhythm guitar on this track. It wasn't old Blackie, but his Telecaster. And Don Felder and Joe Walsh were using, their Gibson Les Pauls. With Joe Walsh using a bottleneck slide and Don Felder using a metal slide. Timothy B Schmit on Fender Precision bass guitar, and Joe Walsh playing Hammond. Don Felder played the Hammond organ on the studio track. Although in the video it was Joe Vitale, who would be the Eagles' touring musician. And of course the song talks about survival and longevity. I used to hurry a lot, I used to worry a lot, I used to stay out to the break of day. Ooh, they couldn't get it. It was a hard time, I quit, I just couldn't carry all that weight. Oh, I've done some damage, I know it's true, didn't know I was so lonely till I found you. We can go the distance, we'll find out in the long run. In the long run. If they show assistance, we'll find out it's a strong one. People talking about got nothing else to do. When all comes down, we will still come through in the long run. And then the next verse, why do you have to work yourself, baby, do the crazy things that you do? Took the debutantes in Houston. I thought for years he was saying, take your chance in Houston, baby. But he was saying all the debutantes, which are another word for hookers in Houston, or rich people. Couldn't hold a candle to you. Of course, when I saw the Eagles in 2018, on the first proper tour they did after the passing of Glenn Frey, this is before the lip syncing came into play, Don Henley sang the debutantes in Boston. I was like, oh man. And this was actually the final encore on the 2018 tour. And I got to see a performance of that tour. at the TD Garden in Boston. Phenomenal performance. One of the top 10 concerts I've ever been to in my life. I never got to see him with Glenn Frey or Don Felder, but hey, before the lip syncing came into play, there was still warts and all live. And it was live in 2018. There was no pre-recorded vocals, I don't think, to my knowledge at that point. But the song is great. And of course, this was the second single from the album, and the song was a top 10 hit for the band. And the song is just brilliant, down from the vocals from Don Henley to the slide guitar of Joe Walsh. And my favorite version was on Eagles Live, which featured an additional instrument that's not on the original recording, a saxophone played by Phil Kinsey, the man who gave you those brilliant saxophone solos on Year of the Cat, Time Passages, Song on the Radio from Al Stewart, and of course he did the sax solo on Poco's big top 10 hit in the late 70s. I forgot, something of the night or something. I'm trying to remember it, but yeah, and of course Phil Kinsey was playing with Rod Stewart at the time on Rod Stewart's Footloose and Fancy Free album and its subsequent tour, and on the Blondes Have More Fun album, and that album's subsequent tour. He left Al Stewart to join Rod Stewart. And then he played with the Eagles once David Sanborn was dealing with some bad drug issues. Phil Kinsey came in and took over playing the saxophone solo live. And the one on the Eagles Live album, I think, may have been overdubbed, because in most of the live versions I heard from audience recordings, Phil Kinsey would hit the alto sax notes even higher than what he played on Eagles Live, because he would just go into the notes that he hit on Song on the Radio, which is the extremely high G, which sounds like dogs, the high G that only dogs can hear. And then when you think he couldn't go higher than that B flat on Time Passages, he goes to C on the alto sax. You're like, what the? And if you listen to the Long Night at Wrong Beach, you know what I'm talking about, or any bootleg recording from that tour, because there are quite a few from the latter part of the tour. He's hitting that note as Don Felder and Joe Walsh are playing slide guitar, going as Don Henley's doing crashes, and Timothy B Schmit going boom, and Glenn Frey going oh my goodness, and the organ of Joe Vitale. But the version on Eagles Live, the sax solo on there was overdubbed. It was fixed in the studio, or it may have been played on the night that they played, where it was recorded. I can grab you the Eagles Live CD right here. I have it in my hands because I own the entire Eagles catalog physically. The version on Eagles Live was recorded at Santa Monica Civic Center on July 27th. So this may have been one of the shows where he did not go into the Time Passages Song on the Radio extreme high note territory for that performance. The song, amazing, great tune. In fact, was used on an episode of WKRP where Johnny Fever finally plays a hit, but it's not on the DVD because Don Henley and Glenn Frey, up until his dying day, refused to license their songs to TV and movies. Sounds familiar to Roger Waters refusing Pink Floyd songs to be licensed to TV and films. I mean, David Gilmour really had no problem with it, but Roger Waters, on the other hand, forget it. Waters is the reason why Dogs isn't on the DVD. Gilmour have been like, whatever. A little extra money for the Floyd revenue, because he co-wrote it. But Roger Waters put his foot down and said, No. I don't want the song on the DVD, on a TV show. Roger, he's a sourpuss. The Eagles, back in 79-80, didn't mind. But then once copyright things came along, the guys became more protective of this. But the song was on the show. What was the show? Oh yeah, it was on WKRP. But the title track to The Long Run, no matter how many times I've heard it, I still think a great track and a catchy hooky, rightful top 10 hit. Second single from the album, and the band's another top 10 hit for the band. And it also appeared on Greatest Hits Volume 2. It also appeared on Very Best of the Eagles and just about every compilation album they've released ever since. The title track to The Long Run, For the Win. And is there anything that Don Henley has to say about... oh yeah, let's see. I think Don Henley did talk about the song in the Eagles magazine here. Oh yeah. According to Rolling Stones, in the Eagles special collection of special edition of Rolling Stone magazine, is said about the track, Henley and Fry display their love of soul music on the Long Run's title cut, and the song's steady groove recalled vintage Stax records as well as Turning Point, a 1975 smash by Chicago singer Tyrone Davis. And despite this extraordinary success of Hotel California, we're collectively in a pretty dark place during the Long Run sessions. We're beginning to see press articles about how we were passe, yet despite celebrating the longevity, the Long Run would be celebrated by a 14-year hiatus. And Don Henley said, "Here we are still indeed going strong. The Long Run indeed." And I think the song is incredible. Great way to open the album. Now we get to the next track, which was another top 10 hit for the band. And this song not only written by Henley and Fry, but the new boy bass player Timothy B Schmit, who makes his lead vocal debut recording on an Eagles track with I Can't Tell You Why, which saw the band kind of emulate R&B soul influence, which kind of reminds you of one of a Motown recording sung by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And Timothy B Schmit playing bass guitar and lead vocal, of course, and singing in a Smokey Robinson-like tenor, and features Don Henley on drums, backing vocals, Glenn Fry on lead guitar on the studio version, as I grab the thing here, and I think organ played by Joe Walsh, guitars by Don Felder and Glenn Fry. Although in live versions, Don Felder did the solo, studio version it was Glenn Fry. And what to say is just this beautiful ballad. Look at us, babe, up all night, tearing our love apart, knowing that we're the same two people who lived through years in the dark. Every time I try to walk away, something turns around to say, and I can't tell you why. Just ain't you right. Oh my God, I was trying to remember the rest of the lyrics. Nothing as far as I can see make it harder than it used to be. And of course, the song is just a beautiful ballad. On the 8-track cartridge, though, the song is shortened. When I first heard the song via the 8-track version, I was like, why'd the song fade out early? So it fades out during the ending guitar solo. You're like, what the hell? Kind of like a quasi-45 edit. But on the album version, you get the full solo as Glenn Fry is just pouring his heart out, playing the guitar solo on this track. And then people are like, oh, Glenn Fry's not playing lead. I go, that's Glenn Fry on the record by means of overdub. But live, Don Felder had to master it. And on Eagles Live, I think Glenn Fry might have overdubbed the guitar solo on Eagles Live. The version on Eagles Live, yeah, Fry overdubbed the solo. Oh my goodness. And yeah, it was also rhythm guitar overdubs from Don Felder on the live recording. On Eagles Live, that is. But live versions, for the most part, was Don Felder. Now you know about the overdubbing disaster on the Eagles Live album here. And the version on Eagles Live was recorded in... I grabbed the booklet here. Bear with me, folks. I'm banned from Wikipedia, so I have to use other means of research stuff if necessary. The version from July 28th, 1980 at the Santa Monica Civic Center. The version of I Can't Tell You Why on there, on this album, is amazing. And they've played it live ever since. And Timothy B Schmit, let's see, he sang on the record, and he's sang it live ever since. And then a live version appears on Eagles Live. And then another live version appears on Hell Freezes Over, which was released in 1994. Their comeback album, which was their first album in almost 15 years. First new studio recordings in 15 years. Their first album release in 14 years. And by that point, the band was pretty much clean and sober when they were doing Hell Freezes Over in 94 and 95. Which turned out to be the third highest grossing tour of 1994. Just behind Pink Floyd's The Division Bell, which was number 2, and the Rolling Stones' Voodoo Lounge, which was number 1. Mick and Keith, I guess, won all the money. That's why they followed the Eagles' pattern of charging $100 a head. The guys in Pink Floyd never went that route back then. They could have, but the band were like, nah, we got an album out. Let's promote the album and just have the tickets reasonable so our fans don't have to suffer for major carnage of paying for concert tickets. But yeah, the song I Can't Tell You Why was another top 10 hit for the band. It was the band's third single from the album, the last one to be released, but also a huge hit for the band, and the song has been covered by a number of artists. Howard Hewitt on the Eagle on an Elektra Records tribute album, and then from the health spawn known as Brownstone, which was a female singing group in the 90s, who only made it because they were signed to the King of Pedophiles' record label. That's, of course, Michael Jackson. Yeah, he was a pedophile, folks. I frown upon child molesters. Oh, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. He paid off the victims, but that's neither here nor there. But their version was crap. The Eagles, still the best version. Vince Gill did a version on the Common Threads Eagles tribute album. And now, ironically enough, Vince Gill is in the Eagles. Go figure, it's a strange twist of fate. It was one of the few who actually had to replace Glenn Frey after he passed away. It took two people to replace Glenn Frey. Glenn's own son, Deacon, and of course, Vince Gill. And yeah, I saw them play this track on the 2018 North American tour. In one of the last performances, it was done in the key of C sharp with B flat minor, because they dropped the song a half step for much of the tour. Then they dropped it another half step before the tour ended. So I went to see him in Boston, night number 2 of, the second night of the 2-night stand they did in Boston. The song was incredible. I can't tell you why. It's been on every Greatest Hits album since it's been released. It's on Greatest Hits Volume 2, Very Best of the Eagles / Complete Greatest Hits, and the Selected Works box set, as was the title track to The Long Run, I forgot to mention. But yeah, I can't tell you why this song is great. I think I've counted the ways. Soul R&B influence, check. Timothy B Schmit's vocal, check. Glenn Frey's guitar solos, check. Oh my goodness. And anything else to add to I Can't Tell You Why? Oh yeah, according to this magazine here, this book, Rolling Stone magazine said about it, quote, in 1977, 5 years of constant hard work was beginning to wear on the band. The strain felt by the late Randy Meisner was acute. He was suffering from stomach ulcers and was in severe pain. And he won't go into details why things fell out. When the band landed in Miami to record The Long Run, this was the first song from the album that was finished and featured the lead vocal by Timothy B Schmit. And Timothy said about the vocal, quote, I was going through a rough emotional time. I was young and confused about how to make relationships function, and this song was a vent for my melancholia. When Schmit was slow in finishing the lyrics, he learned a lesson about his new band's hardened work ethic. I was just kind of having a good time. I wasn't working really hard trying to find the rest of the lyrics. Don Henley came up one day and said, I think I finished this. It was a good lesson for me, Don said. Reality check. When it was eventually completed, I can't tell you why it had such a smooth soul feel that it would be covered by Howard Hewitt, the aforementioned Brownstone, who were signed to pedophile Michael Jackson's record label. Pooey is what I think of Michael Jackson. And Gerald Alston, who has much power in singing than those whiny vixens in Brownstone. Sheesh, Terrence has much hatred for Michael Jackson. That's because I just don't like kid diddlers. But that's just another story for another day. But I digress. So we finished talking about I Can't Tell You Why, and then we go to Joe Walsh's contribution to the album, written by him and Barry DeVorzon, In the City, which Joe Walsh first recorded for the movie The Warriors. Yeah, if you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. That movie about the gangs in New York with Ajax, Swan. My favorite was Ajax, played by James Remar. The wise guy, the one that went to jail after, fighting the cop. You can call the cop an effing wimp. Oh, man. But yeah, In the City. Started out as a Joe Walsh solo track. Somewhere out on that horizon, out beyond the neon light, I know there must be somewhere better, but there's nowhere else in sight. It's survival in the city where you live from day to day. City streets don't have much pity. Looking down, and that's where you stand. I was born here in the city with my back against the wall. Nothing goes in life ain't very pretty. When no one's there to catch you when you fall somewhere out, and then a repeat of the first verse. And I can't stay another night in the city. And then, what a great track! And of course, the song features, as I grab the long run CD booklet here, it featured Joe Walsh on lead vocal and slide guitar. In the live versions back in 1979-80, Joe Walsh was using a Gibson double neck. So the 12-string neck was in standard tuning, so he would play his rhythm guitar parts on that. And then for the slide guitar, he would use his 6-string neck. Don Felder on rhythm guitar, playing his Fender Strat for the most part, most performances. And then Glenn Frey on Hammond organ and grand piano and backing vocals. Timothy B Schmit on bass guitar and backing vocals. Don Felder also on backing vocals, and Don Henley on drums and backing vocals, especially the version which the band re-recorded for the Long Run album, and the versions that they did on the subsequent tour, which was recorded for the Eagles live album but was scrapped. I think it would have fit perfectly if they had an expanded version of this album. They would include a live version. And it was the only time they played it live where Joe Walsh did the slide guitar solo, not just in the middle, but also the end, as the rest of the band singing In the City is just doing the slide guitar thing and just playing brilliantly, I might add. And like the two previous songs, a promotional film was made, or music video, early days of music videos, of the band doing a mock recording session of the track. And a phenomenal song In the City is, and this song has been an album rock radio staple since its release. And yeah, the bands play it live on every tour. They play on the Hell Freezes Over tour, which they ended differently with just Joe Walsh just playing rhythm guitar at the very end. And then ending with a snippet of Day Tripper by the Beatles as they're finishing the ending of the song. That version's on Hell Freezes Over, of course. And of course, I got to see them play it live in 2018 with Joe Walsh doing a batshit guitar solo at the end where he's shredding like no tomorrow. He did the slide guitar thing. He put on a bottleneck for that middle thing, and then he took it off and went to Shred City at the very end, hitting, doing the high bend on the guitar at the very end of the neck to end the solo, and a pick slide at the end. Oh, man. To me, he was the star of the show that night. And the song, like I said, has been on Complete Greatest Hits, / The Very Best of the Eagles, 2 CD set, if you bought it here in the States, and it's also appeared on Eagles' Selected Works box set, and on the recently released To the Limit collection. So the song is held in high regard by the band, despite the fact it started as a Joe Walsh solo track for a movie. The Warriors, the Eagles took it, re-recorded it. It made it much better. In the City, for the win. I don't get tired of it. Great track. Not much more to add. Now we come to a song which a lot of Eagles fans hate, but I don't hate at all. In fact, the song is one of my favorites. It's called The Disco Strangler, written by Don Henley, Glenn Frey, and Don Felder. Don Felder had this guitar riff, the music, da-da-da-da-dun, da-da-da-da-dun. And of course, the other guys in the Eagles decided to do some drop D tuning on the guitar, so they dropped their E string to D to go da-da-dun. Oh my goodness. You think maybe they were influenced by Black Sabbath with drop tunings? You be the judge. But this song, according to this Rolling Stone article, like many rockers in the late 70s, the Eagles were rather ambivalent about disco and its inflexible rhythms. That came out in this shadowy deep track from the Long Run about a woman who was looking for the good life, dressed to kill. She doesn't have to, because she doesn't have to, because always, loose and loaded every night, dancing beyond underneath the fashion lights, saying, "Look at me, I'm beautiful. I'm somebody." Just look into the arms of the Disco Strangler. And the song talks about a woman who meets her demise in a dance club at the hands of a strangler who is the fiddler in your darkest night. As Henley sings, it's watch out for the guy on the date. He might have a knife, says producer Bill Zimzik with a chuckle. And of course, the arrangement fashioned by co-writer Felder with a subtle, ironic nod to thumpy disco beats, and ended up being one of the Eagles' mordant recorded moments. And Timothy B Schmit said this album had a lot of quirky songs, but slipped into the arms of the Disco Strangler. In fact, this was the band's parody of disco. I mean, yeah, it had the disco beat, like Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd had the disco beat, but there was no strings, no synthesizers, no falsetto chorus vocals. It was just the band trying, poking fun at the genre with heavy guitars. Oh my goodness, and Don Henley having to play that 4-on-the-floor beat with the hi-hat thing. Oh my goodness. Saturday Night Fever and Studio 54, this was not. This was the band saying, beware of this shit. This is the devil. Oh my goodness. And the song did surface as the B-side to Heartache Tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, that was another song on the album. I think this was the B-side to either the title track or... I can't tell you why. The photo here on this review will tell you which song it was the flip side to. But the Disco Strangler, I think a phenomenal track. I don't know if it's ever been on any Eagles compilation or retrospective, but as I pull out my Eagles selected works box set, I can tell you if it appeared. As I go to page number 3, the Fast Lane. Yep, it's actually on Eagles selected works, track 3 of the box set. Of disc 3 of the box set, the Fast Lane section. What a killer rockin' tune. I wish there was more I could add to it, but I think a killer song written by Henley, Fry, and Felder. Those three guys wrote Hotel California together on the previous album. And of course they wrote Victim of Love together on the previous album with the late John David Souther, who does equate later into this album. How later we'll tell you. But the Disco Strangler, for the win. Short song, but not short on how great it is. But awesome. Sadly, it was never played live, but c'est la vie. Unlike the next song, which closed side 1 of the album, which begins with a fade-in, called King of Hollywood. Written by Don Henley and Glenn Frey, with Don Henley singing in the baritone range for a change, and Glenn Frey singing in the falsetto. Well, he sits up there, all his leather ripped, looks at the pictures of the ones that he hasn't had yet. When he thinks he wants a closer look, big size old black telephone book, he's calling. I'll sit there here and tell me, darling, let's have a little heart-to-heart. How badly do you want this part? It's about a person who goes to Hollywood trying to make it in show business, in the movies. But the song is very dark, cynical, and a brilliant song it is, and it features... It was actually the only Eagles track which featured all 3 guitarists each taking a guitar solo, with the first guitar coming in played by Glenn Frey, the and then Don Felder doing another harmony, the and then Joe Walsh coming in the oh my goodness, and Don Henley singing in the baritone voice for a change. It shows you he's actually singing in his natural speaking deeper voice. Yeah, we're going to take care of you, darling. Make you a movie star. About a sardonic, creepy movie producer. I made them what they are today. And then the first guitar solo from Glenn Frey, emotional, evocative, played on Black Beauty, his Black Gibson Les Paul Jr., and then finishes the solo, and then Don Felder does the second guitar solo, the do 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 do. Oh my goodness! And then Don Henley has a part where he sings by himself. After a while, nothing looks pretty. After a while, everything I've lost. Still, your jacuzzi running over. Still, you just couldn't get it off. Now he's just a power junkie, just another 6-scarce monkey. You know it if you saw his stuff. The man just isn't big enough. And then ending with the da-da-da-da-da, and then Joe Walsh's ending batty guitar solo where he just goes to town. I think it's either a Les Paul or a Telecaster or a Stratocaster he's using as his guitar on the track. And this song was played live on the subsequent long run tour. A soundboard recording from the LA Forum is online, and the version from LA was phenomenal because it had, Glenn Frey and Don Henley singing, of course, like their parts like on the record. Felder, Walsh, and Frey all on lead guitar. Timothy B Schmit on bass guitar, and on synthesizer was Joe Vitale playing a ARP Omni 2 synthesizer, or an ARP Omni synthesizer. And the ending, Joe Walsh changed his guitar solo at the end around, not playing exactly like he did on the record, but just going to town. And then the song ended, instead of him going to the highest note at the end, he ended with a F sharp minor chord. And this song is the longest song in the album, clocking it at a astonishing 6.5 minutes in length. And a perfect song to end side 1 of the album. And according to this Eagle Selected Works box set, the song is on the box set on disc 3 of the box set, the Selected Works set. Anything else to add to King of Hollywood? But not really, but a great track. Great rock and mid-tempo dirge type thing. Clocking it at over 6.5 minutes, which is the longest song in the finished product. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means album. And a live staple on the long run tour of 1979-80. And just a killer track. And that's all I can say. Now you grab the album and you turn it over to side 2, or you flip the cassette to side 2, or I forgot what number of the 8-track cartridge it was, as one of my items keeps falling out of my perch. Side 2 of the record begins with the Glenn Frey, Don Henley, late J.D. Souther, and Bob Seger collaboration. You heard me right. Bob Seger. To quote my buddy Mark Alden Taylor, if you don't like Bob Seger, you hate America. And their number 1 hit from 1979... a rockin' dirge, not rockin' dirge, but a great blues rockin' track called Heartache Tonight, which begins with the band just rocking out and the boom, boom. I think it was either sound effects of the band or a drum machine. Who knows? But that's one of the hooks of the song, the boom, ba, boom, boom, ba, boom. And this song begins with the band harmonizing, somebody's going to hurt someone before the night is through. Someone's going to come undone. There's nothing we can do. Everybody wants to touch somebody if it feels alright. Everybody wants to take a little chance and make it come alright. Then Joe Walsh's batty slide guitar comes in. And then the band comes in for this great hard blues rocker with Glenn Frey screaming. The chorus that Bob Seger came up with is gonna be a heartache tonight. Heartache tonight, I know. Oh my goodness. And Don and Glenn going, gunk, 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 gunk. You need that hard rock and bluesy thing to work. Some folks like to sail, some folks can't hold out that long, but nobody wants to go home now. There's too much going on. This is Glenn Frey's only solo lead vocal on the entire album, but boy did he deliver in spades. And he even said there was a reason why he sang less lead vocals on Eagles albums as the band's history went on, because how could you compete with Golden Throat, better known as Don Henley? And Don Henley has, if I'm not mistaken, on this album, 5 solo lead vocals. Not 1, but 5. Look at the first album, he only had 2. As the albums progressed, it was now, I think, several lead vocals, and then on Hotel California he had, if I'm not mistaken, 5. 1 from Glenn, 1 from Joe, 1 from Randy. Anyway, the lead vocal progression just grew each album, and according to Don Henley and the band in a Rolling Stone article from when they released this History of the Eagles Ultimate Guide, the song, they said about it, quote, "The shout-along stomper went through a typical prolonged gestation. Frey and J.D. Souther, may they both lay in peace, worked out the basics inspired by Sam Cooke records. Glenn started clapping his hands and singing, and he joined in until the first verse felt right. Later in Aspen, Bob Seger was enlisted. They already had most of the lyrics. and I started singing them really hard. Um, they had most of the lyrics and singing really hard. We can leave it in the park, but either way, there's going to be a heartache tonight. And Don said, "That's it, we're done." To to achieve the perfect sonic boom percussion, Henley laid down on the floor of the studio holding a marching band style drum on his chest and beating it with a mallet. He did that forever. That's what the sound was. I thought it was a drum machine. You learned something new here. And of course, Joe Walsh's slide guitar playing on this track was just killing it. And the song was released as the lead-off single from the album, and it was the band's last number one hit. Yeah, this was in the days where rock tunes could hit number one with a bullet and get away with it. Whatever happened to those days? Oh yeah, the FCC stupid, asinine, retarded policy. The Telecommunications Act by Mr. Bill Clinton. Mr. I tried, but I didn't inhale. That son of a bitch. He had to come up with that stupid, asinine thing of corporations owning stations. And you rarely hear this tune on the radio nowadays. I mean, you even hear In the City more than this track. And it's ironic because this song was a huge hit. In fact, the biggest hit off the album. And the major reason the album did what it did. But Heartache Tonight was played, on just about every tour they've done since its release. And they've been playing it in recent years. And they also did, the first time they did it live after the death of Glenn Frey was in 2017 at the one of those concerts where Bob Seger sang lead vocal. And they had to drop the key from G to E flat, but it worked. Because Bob Seger doesn't have that high of a voice. But Bob delivered the goods. Bob Seger, like I said, if you don't like him, you hate America. Long live Bob. And I will be doing Against the Wind, which that album was the album that ended Pink Floyd's The Wall's reign as number one album in America. But I let that pass because Bob Seger was a great rock and roller. Unlike John Denver, of course, or Tim McGraw. Please, what I think of those. I shouldn't disrespect John Denver, but never mind. But anyway, Heartache Tonight was a huge hit for the band. Great tune. I don't know how many times I've heard it in the last 40 years. But I never get tired of it. And it's appeared on just about every compilation album that they've released. Everything from Greatest Hits Volume 2 to the Selected Works box set to the Limit box set, 3 CD retrospective, and the Very Best of the Eagles 2 CD, aka Complete Greatest Hits if you buy it outside the States. Great rocker. Not much more I can add to Heartache Tonight, but the song fills my heart with joy when I hear it. Heartache Tonight for the win. Now we get to the next track in the album, which was a Glenn Frey, Don Henley, and Don Felder collaboration. A rockin' tune called Those Shoes, which had a sort of a seductive beat. And this featured Don Felder and Joe Walsh on dueling talkbox guitars. And Glenn Frey on rhythm electric guitar. Don Henley on drums and lead vocal, and Timothy B Schmit on the bass guitar. And of course, Don Henley said about the song from the long run, quote, "On the surface, the song was about the singles scene. But the footwear image represented more," he said at the time. At that time, all the girls were wearing Charles Jourdan shoes, the ones with the little ankle straps. We said, well, it's not enough just to write about that. We have to turn it into a metaphor for women who stand on their own 2 feet, so to speak, and taking responsibilities for their own lives, their own losses. And of course, this song just... Oh my goodness. No matter how many times I've heard this. And this song is a rock staple. Who's gonna talk to you tonight, mama? There must be someone you can someplace you can go. All the ranks and the drama. There must be someone you know. And the lyrics escape my mind. Oh no, pretty mama, what you gonna do in those shoes? And the lyrics, you got to have your independence, but you still don't know where to start. All the desperation in the singles bars, all the trick out in the fancy cars. And the dueling talk boxes of Don Felder and Joe Walsh on this track helped make the song kick ass. Sheesh, that's my imitation of the talkbox. Oh no, you can't do that. What you gonna do in those shoes? And then Joe Walsh lets rip his last guitar solo of the album, where he's just voice boxing his ass off. You're thinking maybe he was just gonna do Rocky Mountain Way type solo, but nope. He just goes into insane talkbox guitar solo, where he hits the highest note on the guitar on the entire album, and he's just shredding. And Don Felder doing rhythm during that part, and then Glenn Frey just doing gling, gling. That's his rhythm guitar. I think he was using Black Beauty, his black Gibson Les Paul Jr. And then the solo goes on and finishes with a pick slide with Joe Walsh doing the full imitation of checking out a hot girl going, wow. That's the combination of him doing wow, especially with the pick slide, where you slide your pick across the strings on the guitar to create that effect. And then, of course, the first section of the butt out, where you hear Glenn Frey and Timothy B Schmit scat singing, and then Don Henley sings, they give you tablets of love, they're waiting for you out to score you from the ocean sea. Ooh, they got the kid gloves. Oh my goodness. And then, did you want someone to talk to? They just want to put their hands on you. Oh my goodness. After you've been listening to this album for so many years, you pretty much remember just about everything you hear about the song. And then a repeat of the chorus 2 more times, and then the last butt out, and then Don Henley doing some scat. Butt out, shoes. And then the dueling butt outs just keep going at the end, with Timothy B Schmit and Don Henley, who were a great rhythm section at that time. Timothy's bass anchoring and Don Henley's drumming, and the song ends with the butt out. And the song was played on all shows of the Long Run tour of 1979-80. Then they resurrected it in the post-Don Felder era. I actually got to see them play it live in 2018 at the second of 2 shows at the Boston Garden, or TD Garden as it's now called. But what a phenomenal performance of those shoes. Yeah, I did miss Don Felder playing it, but Stuart Smith had to, although he's a country picker, had to play a rock and roll thing, which is the talkbox, because Don Felder was a rock and roller who grew up with the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, all those bands. And the song has appeared on every compilation the Eagles has released, except for Greatest Hits Volume 2, but it's appeared on Selected Works box set, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it's on the 3rd disc, the Fastlane disc. Then it's also on the Complete Greatest Hits, which is Greatest Hits Volumes 1 and 2 with more album tracks, plus the aforementioned Christmas track and Hole in the World, which was a brand new song at the time. So yeah, the song has appeared on just about many compilations. It's been a live staple ever since 1979-80. I don't think they play on the Hell Freezes Over tour, but I could be mistaken. Let's check the Millennium concert. I think they might have played it on that as well. I don't want to lose my place in the book here. Let me go to the booklet of the Selected Works box set, which is in my face here. And did they do it in 2000? As a matter of fact, yes, they did. The last performance, I think, was December 31st, 1999, with the Long Run lineup, before Don Felder fell out with Messrs. Henley and Frey, because Felder wanted the band to be like a U2 sort of thing, where the band members was all for one, one for all, all for one for all. But Henley and Frey's egos, unfortunately, wouldn't have allowed a U2 type of vibe for the band, or even a Rush type of vibe for the band, where all the members of the band had to say, they got to make, there would, be unanimous decisions, and there would be the ultimate unit. ZZ Top was for many years the ultimate unit. That was until the passing of Dusty Hill, of course. And I think the song appears on To The Limit, the recently released compilation, and it's also on the aforementioned Complete Greatest Hits, I've already mentioned. But those shoes, great rockin' tune, still played on classic rock radio occasionally, And this song was sampled by the Beastie Boys on High Plains Drifter on Paul's Boutique. How Don Henley, Glenn Frey, and Don Felder did not sue the Beastie Boys, we'll never know, but they got away with it. But those shoes, my goodness, you don't like this tune? Excuse me, you don't like the Big Valboski. You know, ladies. You mean Lebowski. Lebowski, Valboski, whatever. All I can think of is, hello, ladies, the wrestler. Warp sense of humor. That's all I got to say about those shoes. Now we get to a song which cries out Black Sabbath. Yeah, the heaviest, dirgiest thing the band ever did. A song called Teenage Jail, which was written by Henley, Frey, and Souther. Normally writing country, ballads and country dirge type things, but not hard, doomy, sludgy, heavy metal rock. You're like, because when I first heard it, I was like, and now listen to it as I get older, I'm like, sheesh, it sounds like what would happen if Ozzy Osbourne and Dio did a duet in the band. Oh my goodness. So the first verse, Glenn Frey singing, stare out the window, you can't make the time flow, you don't even know why you're here. Then the harmonies wait for the weekend to go off the deep end and make everything disappear. And then Don, and Glenn's voice, I swear, sounds like early Ozzy on those first two Black Sabbath albums, especially on like Electric Funeral. Yeah, I was like, yep, Ozzy circa Electric Funeral and Paranoid. That's all I think of with Glenn Frey's lead vocal tone. And then Don Henley during the bridge. You're lost in teenage jail. You can picture Dio singing that part in his lower range. And so young, so vicious, and so frail. Drenched in delay and reverb his voice. Where something is always for sale. You're lost in teenage jail. Those are the lyrics. And then the end, the last verse, you're not like your mother, sung by Glenn. And then Don Henley countering, you're not like your mother. You're not like the others. You're never quite like anyone else. No. They don't even know you. Got nothing to show you. Just get something. You lose yourself. And then Glenn Frey does a brilliant synthesizer solo, which was played on an Oberheim 8-voice synthesizer. Yeah, that's an Obi, all right, because that same synthesizer would be used by quite a few people in those days, especially Fred Mandel when he was in Alice Cooper's touring band from the Inside album. And Glenn Frey used it playing the lower notes on the synth, using one of the voices. Of course, the biggest practitioner of the Oberheim 8 voice at the time was Dennis DeYoung of Styx, but he never used that filter. He used the other stuff on the Oberheim because he was the king of the Oberheim synthesizer. But yeah, Glenn Frey does the solo, which ends with the deep drone synth dive bomb into Don Felder's soaring guitar solo, which he just shreds, like a cross between Hendrix, Iommi, Gilmour, and Clapton and Beck, just going to town. And you're like, God, the solo could go on for ages, which I love the solo. It's one of Don Felder's finest guitar solos. Although the band does not think much of this tune, there's a lot of us who think the song is awesome. Excellent in kicking everyone right square in the panties. I mean the pants, sorry. But Teenage Jail, great rocker. Teenage Jail, killer rockin' tune. Yeah, the Eagles doing Black Sabbath. Who would have thunk it? But it is a great tune. Those who don't like it, sue me. In fact, the song wasn't played live. It should have been, but never mind. But it was a B-side to, I believe, Heartache Tonight when it was released. Which it was, yes. I mean, remember, folks, I'm banned from Wikipedia, so I'm trying to remember on memory reliance here, and my memory is not failing me with this. So, Teenage Jail, another rockin' track for the win. And now we come to the penultimate song on the original album. The Greeks Don't Want No Freaks, which was, if I'm not mistaken, written by Don Henley and Glenn Frey. And according to the long-run CD booklet, which I have the CD and I have the vinyl, yes, folks, I do have it on 2 formats, the song was written by Don Henley and Glenn Frey. And it featured backing vocals by the Monster Tones, which was the code for the band's road crew, featuring the late Jimmy Buffett. Yeah, this was the first time I ever heard his name was on this album sleeve. And this song is a rave up of the Question Mark and the Mysterians, the frat rock thing, which was big in the late 60s, which was something like Glenn Frey would have been listening to. In fact, this was his Question Mark and the Mysterians 96 Tears tribute, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the frat rock thing. And then Don Henley singing the vocals. There was beer all over the dance floor, and the band was playing rhythm and blues. You got down in the, and a half an hour later, you were barfing all over your girlfriend's shoes. But the Greeks don't want no freaks. Put a little smile on them rosy cheeks. And then the da 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 Gator. Oh my goodness, I'm yelling Gator. She was in the Passion of Dixie. She did exactly what her daddy had planned. Something with the boys in the band. The lyrics are trying to remember the lyrics, but this song is a great rave up. And yeah, Glenn Frey on Hammond organ, Don Felder and Joe Walsh on electric guitars, and Glenn Frey on both Hammond organ and the, I think a Farfisa organ type of thing. Don Henley on drums and lead vocals, and the Monster Tones, the Eagles Road Crew, and Jimmy Buffett, may he lay in peace, on backing vocals. Doing that Greeks don't want no freaks thing. Oh my goodness. And ending with the guys going, oh my goodness. And then them just jamming out singing as the song fades out. And this song is overlooked in the Eagles canon. A lot of people don't like this song, but those people don't really make much of a difference. Just want to make aware of the fact, that's all. But I think the Greeks don't want no freaks is a nice rave up of those 1960s college frat 96, Question Mark and the Mysterians sort of tunes. But a great song nevertheless. Now we go from the Monster Tones and rave up to a ballad to end the album. And for 15 years was the last new Eagles song for over a decade and a half. And this is one of the best album closes in the history of mankind. A song entitled The Sad Cafe, written by Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Joe Walsh, and J.D. Souther. And it featured Glenn Frey on Fender Rhodes, electric piano, Joe Walsh on rhythm electric guitar, Don Felder on acoustic guitar, and does the acoustic guitar solo, Don Henley on vocals and drums, Timothy B Schmit on bass guitar, and of course all the other 4 members, those are 4 members of the band doing backing vocals, Walsh, Felder, Frey, and Meisner. And Meisner being the songbird, singing those extremely higher notes in the harmonies, and Glenn singing the low end, because he had to become the baritone of the band after Bernie Leadon left the group. But c'est la vie. But yeah, during this song here, what Don Henley said on the liner notes, and it's this Rolling Stone magazine about the track, during the making of 1975's One of These Nights album, producer Bill Zimzik instituted a policy for all the band's recording sessions called the 6 o'clock rule. No drinking nor drugs before 6 o'clock. Sometimes you hear him grumbling like, is it 6 yet? He says, laughing. And on the Long Run album, the final album before their breakup, even that diktat wouldn't be enough to keep the band's process from bogging down. The band closed the album with The Sad Cafe, an elegy to the scene that begat them. And the late J.D. Souther said about the song, quote, "It's more than anything else about losing your innocence, or our innocence." And Don Henley, and he said it was a real place and still a favorite restaurant, Dan Tana's, where for years we huddled in the back booth and schemed and dreamed and laughed more than it seems possible. And the song's title came from the Ballad of the Sad Cafe, a 1951 collection of Carson McCullers stories. And Don Henley sings one of the best lead vocals ever recorded on an Eagles track on this song. Out in the shiny night, the rain was softly falling. Tracks that ran down the boulevard and hoped it washed away. Out of the silver line, the past came softly calling. I remember the times we spent inside the sad cafe. Oh, it seemed like a holy place protected by amazing grace. We would say right out loud the things we could not say. We thought we could change this world with words of love and freedom. We were part of the lonely crowd inside the sad cafe. Then, of course, the pre-bridge. Oh, expecting to fly, we would meet on that beautiful... I'm trying to think. We would meet on that beautiful board on the sweet by and by. I'm trying to remember the lyrics. Some of the dreams came true. Some just passed away. Some of them stayed behind inside the sad cafe. And then Don Felder's acoustic guitar solo, just so moving and so amazing. I think it might have been double-tracked, or he might have done the moving his fingers across several strings. He wasn't called fingers just for kicks and giggles, folks. Gling, 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 ding, ding. One of the best acoustic guitar solos on record. In a year of a lot of acoustic guitar solos on albums. Crazy Circles from Bad Company's Desolation Angels comes to mind. The classical guitar solo on All My Love from Led Zeppelin, after the synth solo, of course. What else had acoustic guitar solos on it in 1979? Trying to think. Trying to escape my mind. Of course, Al Stewart had several of them. On the Border, Year of the Cat, Time Passages, End of the Day on his two albums, as well as I guess you could count, is there anybody out there from Pink Floyd from The Wall? But that's an acoustic guitar finger picking exercise. But still, an acoustic guitar solo on record, done brilliantly, I might add. And this acoustic guitar solo, short and plaintive, but just hit you right to the bone. And then the last section of the song, the bridge, the clouds rolled in and hit that shore, and now that Florida train, it don't stop here no more. And then Don Henley singing, now I look at the years gone by and wonder of the powers that be. I know that fortune smiles on some and lets the rest go free. Who would have thunk that? Maybe the time has drawn the faces I've recalled, but things in life change very slowly if they ever change at all. You couldn't have said it better, Don Henley. I agree with you on that assessment. Things in life change very slowly if they ever change at all. And to quote Mark Knopfler, times change, but people don't. That quote just is stuck with me. And, Mark Knopfler adopted it in the interview with Redbeard. Times change, but people don't. Basically, he's summing up that things in life change very slowly if they ever change at all. There's no use in asking why if things turn out that way, so meet me at midnight, babe, inside the sad cafe. Why don't you meet me at midnight, babe, inside the sad cafe? Into this beautiful alto saxophone solo played by the now deceased, sheesh, a lot of people are dropping like flies here, David Sanborn. And this is the first time I ever heard David Sanborn in my entire life, because I was not into smooth jazz, but my introduction to him was on this song when I was a small child. It's a true story, because up until then I had never heard of David Sanborn. I never heard the name until this album, of course, because my memory was starting to form at like 4 or 5 years old. But yeah, this was my first sax solo I ever heard from him, and it wouldn't be the last, because David Sanborn would go on to play with the likes of, prior to this he did Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run as part of a horn section. He did that alto sax solo on Linda Ronstadt's beautiful cover of Ooh Baby Baby. Yeah, she did it better than the Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Sue me. But she was a songbird. That soprano that could always hit me. Bless her. And David Sanborn did the brilliant sax solo on that. He did the sax solo on this. And then, of course, he would go on to play saxophone with former Pink Floyd mastermind Roger Waters on the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking. Played the album, of course, with some of his most fiery sax work, especially on Running Shoes, For the First Time Today Part 2, which he used a tenor saxophone for a change instead of the alto, which he's famous. Also on Go Fishing after that Dobro solo from Eric Clapton. Of course, Clapton and the also deceased Michael Kamen would work with David Sanborn on 4 Lethal Weapon movies. So yeah, small world of music. And then For the First Time Today Part 1, and the title cut to the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, that sax solo at the very end. David Sanborn phenomenal. In fact, the Eagles took him on tour to play this song on the subsequent long run tour. In fact, he did the whole of the 1979 leg and most of the 1980 legs, and he played alto saxophone on this and live versions of the long run. But his coke problem, he was addicted to that Martian foot powder, caused his playing to get, to go south. So he voluntarily checked himself out of the band to go into rehab, and the rest, as they say, is history. And he was replaced by Phil Kinsey, of course, who played with Al Stewart, Poco, Paul McCartney, and Rod Stewart. And he would do the rest of the long run tour, the rest of the 1980 shows of the long run tour, including the infamous Long Night at Wrong Beach, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But the Sad Cafe was played every night on the long run tour. A soundboard recording does exist, but you'd have to scour the internet for it, because I'm afraid to put it up, because I'm afraid of getting account yanked by one Don Henley. No offense to Don Henley, but talented musician, but he can be a very stingy human being when it comes to having his music spread out on YouTube, or any channel for that matter. And this song has appeared on every compilation album from Greatest Hits Volume 2 forward that would involve a deep track. So it was on Complete Greatest Hits Volume, the Complete Greatest Hits, which is also known as the Very Best of the Eagles here in the United States, also on the The Limit 3-disc retrospective, and the Selected Works 1972 to 1999 box set on disc number 2, and it's, as I look at this darn thing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The 11th song on disc 2 of Eagles Selected Works. Which that disc is called, as I almost lose my place in the booklet, The Ballads. Sheesh. I'm on fire today, aren't I, folks? And the song actually is a little emotional attachment, because it also was dedicated to a friend of theirs who had passed away just before the album was finished, Joe Barrick. And whoever Joe Barrick is, may he lay in peace. And he was a phenomenal, who was one of the friends of the guys in the Eagles. And this song, The Sad Cafe, beautiful, beautiful song. And deservedly on most compilation albums released since 1982's Greatest Hits Volume 2. And that is the perfect way to close the Long Run album. So when this album was first released in September of 1979, the hype was instantaneous. The album debuted at number 3 on the Billboard album chart, which in those days was a big deal. Nowadays, debuting in the top 10 is not a big deal, but back in 1979, it was a big deal. So big of a deal that most people were like, what? Because the only thing that debuted at number 1 was Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life, and 2 Elton John albums up to that point. And then Bruce Springsteen would do that feat again with 1975 to 85 Live. But the Long Run did go in its second week to number 1 on the Billboard album chart, displacing JCM's favorite Led Zeppelin album, In Through the Outdoor, from the top spot. I'm like, what the heck? Yeah. And the Long Run was number 1 for, I think, 8 or 9 weeks on the Billboard album chart, and until it was displaced by Donna Summer's On the Radio 2-disc Greatest Hits, which in turn was displaced by the Bee Gees' Greatest Hits, then was displaced by an episode I had just aired, Pink Floyd's The Wall. And the Long Run, while it didn't match the sales of Hotel California, it still did very well. It sold about 7 or 8 million copies up to this day. It was certified platinum in February 1980. And 7 times platinum, meaning 7 million copies sold in just the United States alone since its 1979 release. And over the years, the album has been re-released in various different guises, including CD. It was released on CD in the 80s, and in the late 90s it was remastered by Ted Jensen, the band's longtime mastering engineer, who did the original mastering on the vinyl record back in the day. He remastered it for the 1999 remasters, and it sounded incredible. And then again, it was remastered for the 2018 Legacy box set by Bernie Grundman, who is also a mastering engineer genius. And the band toured in support of the album, promoting the long run, which had three top 10 singles, one of which hit number 1, the other 2 top 10. And the band relations during that tour, let's just say, went straight to hell in a bucket. I mean, of course, let's talk about the infamous night where left-wing Senator Cranston, Allan Cranston, was running for Senate, and Don Felder, who was the apolitical member of the band, meaning he thought all politicians were scum, God bless him, was not happy doing Democrat, endorsing political candidates. He wanted to do concerts for the blind, the disabled, issues that really mattered. Handicapped people, blind, for the sick, for the poor. That type of concerts would be perfect. But for a political guy, that's madness. So Allan Cranston went to greet every member of the band, saying, "Hey, thank you for coming and doing this." And Henley, Fry, Walsh, and Schmit were like, "Yeah, you're welcome, of course." Don Felder, God bless him. This is why I love him. He goes, "You're welcome, I guess." He said, "I guess." I'm like, oh man, that took a lot of balls to say that. Imagine saying that to someone like Obama or Harris or something, to say something rude and crude, not wanting to be there. You'd rather do a charity event for autism or something and just say whatever to them. Thank you, whatever. The press now would be like, how dare he speak ill of the Democrat Party? Oh my God. Allan Cranston eventually turned out to be a crooked politician, of course. But it created a huge, huge stink. And that show was professionally recorded, and you have audio of Glenn Fry and Don Felder threatening to kick the shit out of one another. And, 2 more songs, I'm going to kick your ass. Yeah, I'd like to see you try it, you son of a bitch. Oh, my God. Yeah, you're a pro all the way. Yeah, fuck you, fuckhead, you piece of shit. Oh, my goodness. I apologize for swearing, but that's exactly what they said. I'm afraid of playing the audio of fear of getting copyright flagged. But if you saw the documentary on the Eagles, you know what I'm talking about. So when the tour ended, the band just imploded. Don Felder took one of his Takamine acoustics, smashed it to smithereens, got in the limousine, and drove off. And many of the band members would not see each other for years. I mean, for many years, Don Henley and Don Felder really had no issues, because Don Henley would go on to work with Don Felder on Heavy Metal Taking a Ride, as did Timothy B Schmit. Timothy B Schmit was like Switzerland neutral. He didn't take sides in the war. So Henley and Fry had their big bust up, and then they had to release another album. So Asylum Records were like, we need another album. So they put together Eagles Live, which came out in November of 1980, just in time for the Christmas sale. And Eagles Live, yeah, I know a lot of it was overdubbed, but some of those versions are better than the studio versions. And most of the album, except for 5 songs, were recorded in 1980. The Long Run Tour. Most of it was recorded at, I can tell you where it was recorded, as I grab the CD booklet of Eagles Live here. Reason being is because I'm not going to use Wikipedia, because their stance, I don't follow it. Most of it was recorded, a lion's share of it was recorded at Santa Monica Civic Auditorium between July 27th and 29th, 1980, with one song from the Long Night at Wrong Beach show. And then there was a few songs that were recorded in 1976 during the Hotel California pre-release. And it was recorded by the Record Plant Mobile truck and also the Wally Heider recording truck. And then the album was mixed and FedExed and overdubbed by Bill Zimzik at Bayshore Recording Studio in Coconut Grove, Florida. And the art direction and the cover art was done by Kosh, and the cover and label photography was done by Aaron Rappaport. And if you bought the record, you notice that there was Hand Grenades in an Eagle's Nest. That was the picture label of the album because you knew the band was about to explode, as in break up, which they would in 1982. But I'll give you my quick synopsis of the songs on Eagles Live, starting with side 1. Hotel California, my favorite version of all time. That in Capitol Center 77. But this version, amazing. Especially the guitar solo where Walsh and Felder would trade pick slides after their solos. Perfect. Love it. Heartache Tonight, and that was recorded July 29th, 1980. Then Heartache Tonight from 2 nights earlier on July 27th. Great live version. Amazing. I Can't Tell You Why, recorded on the 28th of July, 1980. And yeah, Glenn Frey overdubbed the guitar solo on I Can't Tell You Why for this recording. They removed Don Felder's solo and put Glenn Frey's solo on it. And then Don Felder had added a rhythm guitar track to the song because there was no rhythm guitar in the live versions. The Long Run was from July 27th with that amazing Phil Kinsey sax solo, which I think he re-recorded for the album because he was hitting extremely high notes. The Time Passages high notes, but at this time in C, on the live audience recordings of this that I've heard, which was done after Joe Walsh's slide guitar solo. But great version nevertheless. New Kid in Town from October 22nd, 1976, featuring Vince Melmid on electric piano, and J.D. Souther, who played acoustic guitar and sang backing vocals on that performance, recorded at the Forum in L.A. in October of 1976. I think that same version's on the deluxe edition of Hotel California. And then you have Life's Been Good. Yeah, I'm sorry, Joe Walsh version, but the Eagles did it much better. Was recorded on the same night as Hotel California, and it featured Joe Walsh and Don Felder on electric guitars, and the harmony guitar solo in the middle, and Joe Walsh doing the amazing guitar solo at the end. Glenn Frey playing slide guitar. Don Henley on drums. Timothy B Schmit on bass guitar, and Joe Vitale playing the keyboards like he did on the version with Joe Walsh. But this version, I think it's because I heard this before I heard the Joe Walsh version. I'm used to this one. And Joe Walsh's campaign for running for president, even more priceless. And that was the end of disc 1 of the album. Side 1 of the extended length cassette, and it was like the end of program 2 on the 8-track cartridge. And then you had to grab record 2 and put on side 3, which began with Seven Bridges Road, recorded on the 28th of July, 1980. First heard that on the Eagles' Greatest Hits Part 2, Volume 2 album, and it's been on just about every compilation ever since, except for the Selected Works box set, which is not included, but it's on Complete Greatest Hits / Very Best of the Eagles and the To The Limit retrospective. And yeah, they've played Seven Bridges Road sporadically over the years since as a concert opener. And yeah, I saw them play Seven Bridges Road the night I went to see them in Boston in July of 2018. But they dropped the key to C, but it still worked in C. Doesn't make a difference if it's in D or C. The song is still a great little toe tapper written by Steve Young. And yeah, great track. Then we go back to the rest of side 3 was the Hotel California performances in the Forum in L.A. Wasted Time, which is not on that Hotel California Deluxe Edition. So it's a take from, it's a different take. I don't know how much of it was overdubbed, but you couldn't overdub Randy Meisner because he was gone from the band by then. But yeah, Wasted Time from October 22nd, 1976. The same performances as New Kid in Town. Take It to the Limit, which featured Randy Meisner's soaring singing, may he lay in peace, and the orchestration overdubs by Jim Ed Norman. I think the orchestra was there for that performance. And the orchestra was phenomenal on that track, and Randy Meisner sang it brilliantly. And just an amazing performance of that song it is. It was, and forever shall be. Then you have an instrumental called Duel in Dalton Reprise 2, which is just a string orchestral interlude, kind of like Wasted Time Reprise on Hotel California, which then bleeds into Desperado to end side 3, and that was from October 21st, 1976. Brilliant performance, I might add. Now, side 4 was Saturday Night from July 28th, 1980. And that was the first time I heard that deep cut from Desperado was on this live album. They would eventually play it again on the History of the Eagles tour in 2013 as the opening song, with Don Henley and Glenn Frey singing on acoustic guitars. Just those two with no one else. Great song it is, nevertheless. Then Joe Walsh's song from Urban Cowboy, All Night Long, is next. And the Eagles version I like better than the Urban Cowboy version, because Don Henley was on drums again. Glenn Frey, Don Felder, and Joe Walsh all on guitars. Timothy B Schmit on bass guitar, Joe Vitale on keyboards, and the Monster Tones on backing vocals. And then thinking the song's going to end like the Urban Cowboy version, it gives you a fake ending. And then you hear the count in 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, into a piano solo from Joe Vitale, done brilliantly. Then a guitar solo from Glenn Frey, which just kicked everybody in the nuts. And then Don Felder's amazing guitar solo, which was kicking ass. And Joe Walsh does the final solo. As always, kicking ass. And who would have... And you couldn't even tell that Frey and Felder were about to kill one another when they recorded this particular version, because this is from the Long Beach Arena show, which the band imploded. A little tidbit I'd share with you. One of the songs from that infamous gig surfaced on this live album. God bless the Eagles. Then Life in the Fast Lane recorded live on July 27th. The same performance that gave you Heartache Tonight. Brilliant version, I might add. And Don Henley's vocals not drenched in flange or delay. And there's no flanging on this track either. But you do hear some great twin drumming from Don Henley and Joe Vitale on this track. And clavinet from Glenn Frey, Don Felder, and Joe Walsh trading leads in the middle. And the ending guitar solo from Joe Walsh, just playing that Telecaster, or it may have been a Strat, I ain't so sure. But he was using Telecasters and Stratocasters for his main solos. If it was slide guitar or in the city, he'd be using a Gibson. But Life in the Fast Lane, the version on here, amazing. And then, of course, Take It Easy, live version here, brilliant. And from the July 27th, 1980 gig, To Bring It All On Home. And that's how the album ends. And if you had the original vinyl record, the closeout inner groove, the live crowd just abruptly would go on forever. If you had a turntable where you had to manually lift the handle of the record player, you had to manually lift it because the crowd noise would go on forever. But on the CD and the later cassette versions, the crowd noise just faded, which all CD versions, the crowd noise just faded. But on the original vinyl record, the crowd would just go on forever unless you lifted the needle off the record player and put it back. Man, oh man, oh man. And then Eagles Live, upon its release, went to number 7 on the Billboard album chart, which wasn't bad for a live album. If your live album hit the top 10 or top 15, it was considered a success back in those days. And the live album, I think, has sold, 4 or 5 million copies in the U.S. alone. The RIAA will help me verify how much it sold. But it would be eclipsed by Hell Freezes Over, that I know for sure, 14 years later. And that would be the final thing the Eagles would release, recorded together, until Hell Freezes Over. But that's another story for another day. But the Eagles, phenomenal band, The Long Run, a phenomenal album, and Eagles Live, a phenomenal album as well. And that's my look at the Eagles on this episode. And before I go, I'm going to recommend, if you want to get into the Eagles, here's your best bets to start with. If you don't know where to start, just go buy Greatest Hits Volumes 1 and 2, either as a 2 LP or a 2 CD set, which would be your economic bang for the buck, or you can buy the complete Greatest Hits 2 CD set, which is also recommended, or the 1972 to 1999 studio albums, 1972 to '79 Asylum Years box set of the studio albums from Asylum, or if you can find that box set that was in the 2000s with those aforementioned, plus Eagles Live and the Police Come Over for Christmas single in one box. It's now worth a lot of money. Trying to find one in mint conditions, like trying to pull teeth, but a great set nevertheless. And last but damn sure not least, you have the Eagles Legacy box set, which brings everything they've done up till Glenn Frey's passing. All the studio albums, all the live albums, the rare tracks, the live Hell Freezes Over DVD, and the live Farewell Tour Blu-ray. The Eagles are a great band, and if those who say they're not, you don't know your music history. Because there's a lot more to it than what you hear on terrestrial radio. If you grew up with them like I did, you have an emotional attachment to the band. So that's it for the time being. So before I go, here's some plugs for some other radio shows and podcasts I want you to give your love to, and to quote General MacArthur, I shall return. Check out The Rockin' Tours with Guy Pratt and Gary Kemp, both from Nick Mason's Saucerful of Secrets. Also check out Eddie Trunk's podcast, How Can Anyone Not Like Eddie Trunk? It's humanly impossible. And of course the Chris Jericho podcast, Y2J for the Win, and the following YouTube channels. Michael Borland's Classic Rock channels on YouTube, John Bowden's various Classic Rock YouTube channels. He's awesome. Freeform Rock podcast with my buddy Mark Alden Taylor. That's recommended as well. The Villain Cult podcast with Roy Dam, Eric Lawton, and Mike Lockhart. How can anyone not like those guys? Classic Rock Review. That's recommended. The Professor of Rock. Darren Locke. He's recommended. He's funny. He's deadpan British humor, but God bless him. Melinda Murphy's channel's recommended. Brandon Snyder, great YouTuber. Pete Pardo, Sea of Tranquility. The Man, the Myth, the Legend. And my new favorite, JCM Led Zeppelin Stories. Jose is the king of Led Zeppelin, and the man who's got more copies of In Through the Outdoor than any other human being I know in my life. He has about 50 some odd copies of it. And his YouTube channels and his deep dives into Zeppelin things, awesome, awesome, awesome. And if you're not a Zeppelin fan, check out his channel. You'll be very surprised, guaranteed. Then again, he's the same dude who got me into Santana as of late. JCM, I want to thank you for that, brother. And you're more than welcome to come on my show, and you and I definitely will have to do a collaboration one of these days. We'll have to figure out the time and the place. So before I go, here's some recommendations for other podcasts and so forth and so on. I want you fans to give your love to, and to quote General MacArthur, I shall return.
Hi, this is Mark Olden Taylor from the Freeform Rock Podcast, where we rock and roll all night and party every day. Come check us out on iTunes and Podbean. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Chris.
And we're from the Decibel Geek Podcast. And if you love this...
then you'll love us.
That's right. Brand new episode every single Monday. You can find us on iTunes and at decibelgeek.com. And the best thing is, it's rock and roll and it's always free.
Mistress Carey reporting for duty. That's right. After rocking the airwaves in Boston for 22 years on WAAF, welcome to the Mistress Carey Podcast. And if you love rock, this weekly podcast is for you. I'll introduce you to new bands that I think you are going to love, and keep you in touch with the bands that are already your favorites. I'll take you backstage and expose you to the people behind the rock. Plus, we'll talk about everything else that we know and love, like motorcycles, tattoos, skydiving, hot rods, food, booze, and so much more. And let's not forget all of the branches of our military, our veterans, and first responders. Everything you know and loved about the Mistress Carey Show, but now I'm unfiltered and uncensored. Fuck yeah! And if you never heard me before, well, welcome to the party. Subscribe now so you don't miss Mistress Carey Podcast.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency.
Brain damage with Pink Floyd.
This stuff can give you brain damage. Floyd Radio Show.
Use only as directed.
There is no downside in the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all
Your controls are set to the Random Precision Radio Network. This is Floodian Slip, an hour of Pink Floyd. I'm Craig Bailey. Find us online at floodianslip.com. Write to us at pink@floodianslip.com. Floodian Slip is a Random Precision production.
You're listening to Nights with Alice Cooper. I think my Speedo is starting to cut off the flow of oxygen to my head. And that's why I got so temperamental with anyone who has the impertinence to question his wisdom. And hello, I pops his inner courier.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. Redbeard here with the stories behind history's greatest rock and roll albums. Follow In the Studio on Facebook, at Redbeard Rocks on Twitter, and online at inthestudio.net.
Well, my friends, the classic rock brainiac has got to go for now to end 2024, and I'll be back in 2025 with a number of new episodes, some Led Zeppelin episodes, some Genesis episodes, quite a few, either new or old but new, or a combo of the two. What will it be? I do know next will be Cornerstone from Styx, brand new version of it, which I completely re-recorded, and also a few other things which I will get to as the year goes on. So for now, this is the Classic Rock Brainiac saying thanks for tuning on in. Have a wonderful holiday season. Happy New Year, because Christmas is already past. I love you all. Thanks for listening. Good night. God bless you. TJR's Classic Rock Corner podcast was written, produced, hosted, so on and so forth by yours truly, the Classic Rock Brainiac, Terrence Reardon. The intro music and the outro music is by the one and only Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin from the Death Wish 2 soundtrack. Copyright 2025 TJR Rock Sponge Incorporated. All rights reserved. Once again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Good night, my friends. God bless you.